Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Andrew Berry is the longest reigning general manager the Cleveland Browns has had, not just since 1999, but since 1991. Yes, going all the way back to Ernie Accorsi, right? When he was the general manager of the Cleveland Browns from the mid 80s to early 90s, Andrew Berry has held this down. He is the last guy to have had that job longer than Andrew Berry has had the job. This means that Andrew Berry gets to have something in Cleveland, whether it be positive or negative, that most people who take the job won't, which is an actual legacy, right? He's going to leave behind, if he gets fired next year, 5 years of work. If he stays as the general manager of the Cleveland Browns and the Browns start to have some success, this whole thing turns around. Andrew Berry's very young. He could be the general manager for the next 20 years. Who knows how this thing shakes out? But what we know right now today is that he is the most tenured general manager the Cleveland Browns have had since the mid 80s. We also know that despite the fact that the Browns have been on a roller coaster ride of emotions, the Browns, from a win-loss standpoint, have been as successful as they've ever been, have been more successful than they were in the last 5 years when Andrew Berry got the job versus what they were since 1999. Now again, that is a low bar, so that doesn't mean that Andrew Berry should have immunity from being fired for the rest of his career simply because he's better than everything else that the Browns had since 1999. But that's not the point of this video. If you want to evaluate Andrew Berry, I've been working for months on a video about that. That's going to drop sometime in March. What we're going to talk about today is how this offseason will truly dictate the legacy of Andrew Berry, whether it be remembered for positive reasons or negative reasons. This offseason is going to be the tipping point. The reason I think that is because I think this offseason is one of the most tricky offseasons for a general manager, like in sports, to handle, because you got a lot of fires on the stove. If you're the Cleveland Browns, you do have some flexibility on how to handle this, which makes things tricky, right? You can make mistakes, big mistakes this offseason. The Browns have the ability to free up enough cap space to make some giant mistakes if they want to, right? The Browns have the number 2 overall pick. Like the Browns, what makes an offseason tricky isn't that you are locked in to not having a ton of options because you're in cap hell and you don't have draft picks. Those off seasons are easy to handle because what are you going to do? You really got nothing that you can really do about that, right? Like nobody's going to blame you for not making a big move because everybody understands that you don't have the freedom to do anything. But this offseason is different. The Browns have more latitude to move this offseason than they've ever had. They're free of any expectations they have of the quarterback position. They're free of the draft pick burden of the quarterback that you traded for. Yes, you still have to deal with the contract burden of that guy, but the way you have structured it so far has allowed you to still have some freedom and flexibility when it comes to spending around that contract. All things considered, this means that there's a lot of room for Andrew Berry to make some moves that can dig him out of this mess and put the Browns in a position to win some games. But there's also enough room, but if there's room to make those positive impacts, there's also room for negative impact, right? There's also room for mistakes that could burden this team longer than they need to be burdened and put this team in a deeper hole than they already are in. You add that on top of the fact that you have a Myles Garrett trade request situation that you need to handle. You have a crisis at the quarterback position. Your offensive line is getting older. Your core in general of players is getting older. And now you're starting to really feel what not having 3 first-round picks has done to that core because you haven't been able to replenish it and add new players to that core over the last 3 years at an elite level because you haven't had those top picks. Now we're going to see what Andrew Berry is made of. If he is a good GM, he should be able to come out this offseason fine with the Browns in a place to not only be competitive, but not be tied up in the future. But if Andrew Berry is not the GM that should be here long term, well, then, he's going to fall into a lot of problems. I was watching a video from Level One Rock. So shout out to Level One Rock. He made a video about the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef, and it was about instant gratification versus delayed gratification and how that beef basically worked out in Kendrick's favor because he was not trying to seek out instant gratification. Drake was trying to seek out instant gratification, get the high fives from the internet, have everybody tell him how smart he is, how good he is. Oh man, Drake's winning the beef early, right? He wanted that early lead. Kendrick did not seek that out and made moves that aged better over time. And now when we look back at it, everything that Kendrick says, or at least said in that beef, feels a lot more prophetic than what it was when it released. Drake went for instant gratification and had that fun before Kendrick dropped Euphoria. And then it all stopped. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because it made me think of this offseason. There's going to be a really strong push for instant gratification moves for the Cleveland Browns to make because a lot of people are seeking that instant gratification this offseason. Now, you may ask the question, Quincy, how do we know that the people who want the Browns to draft the quarterback, or the majority of the arguments that we're hearing about the Browns needing to draft the quarterback, are about seeking instant gratification? I think the tell in this is in the justification. You can tell a lot about what somebody is seeking by how they try to justify making the move there. When it comes to a player, if you truly believe in that player and have a long-term vision for that player, it should not be difficult for you to vocalize that vision for that player and spend the bulk of your energy talking up that player. When I talk about Abdul Carter, I'm not arguing for the merits of taking an edge player at 2 or the overall argument of not passing on edges at 2. My argument is not about positional value with Abdul. It is about Abdul as a prospect and why I think he is worth the number 2 overall pick. It is a coherent argument. You can agree with it or not, but my argument with Abdul Carter has tons of film research behind it, tons of film study that I have shared with you guys on this platform, and tons of football reasons for why I think this is a prospect who justifies a number 2 overall selection regardless of position. But the arguments I see for drafting a quarterback aren't about Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. It's about this amorphous idea of just drafting a quarterback. You've noticed that, right? Whenever you argue with somebody about if the Browns should take a quarterback, their arguments are never based in their belief of the individual prospects themselves, just their belief in the position's important. And yeah, is quarterback important? I agree with you. Quarterback's very important. But just drafting somebody at the quarterback position doesn't solve the quarterback problem. You have to draft the right person at the quarterback position in order to solve your quarterback problem. But if you're justifying it by saying, hey, we're going to solve the quarterback problem by drafting a quarterback without having a real belief in any of these quarterbacks, because again, you're not willing to argue for the individual player, you're just arguing for the importance of the position, well, then what you're really pushing for is to satisfy that instant gratification. You don't want to draft the quarterback because you are blown away by one of these prospects or that you truly believe in these prospects. You want to draft the quarterback because you want to win the lottery at quarterback and you're hoping to scratch off Shedeur Sanders or scratch off Cam Ward, and then hopefully you win a quarterback out of it. You just really want to feel like there's an answer at quarterback. Again, that's instant gratification. That's going to make you feel better in the short term. Long term, a strategy like that has long-term strategies like that don't tend to work out well, that need for instant gratification. Nathan Zegura, who is somebody I respect, I'm not going to tolerate any disrespect of Nathan Zegura in the comment section. We'll put that part clearly. But I saw this clip from him, and it's a short, so it might not be fully representative of what he was saying. But what the overall clip was saying, I thought was pretty emblematic of a lot of the arguments I hear about the quarterback position, and they're usually supported in the same flawed way that Nathan Zegura kind of supports this argument for quarterback.
There are no sure things in the NFL draft. The hit rate in the first round is like 50%. Mm-hmm. And that's regardless of position. So there are no sure things in the draft. So you can't say, oh, it's a safer pick to not take a quarterback because they're – no, it's not. There are no sure things in the NFL draft. But there is one 100% sure thing in the NFL, an absolute truth. If you don't have a quarterback, you cannot win.
First off, what does hit rate even mean? Like, what are we saying equals a hit in the draft? Are we saying Pro Bowl appearances? Are we saying years as a starter? Are we using approximate value and averaging it over the first round that the player was selected in and saying that means a 50% hit rate? Because if you do that, then automatically 50% of the people in that draft will qualify as over that hit rate because that's how averages works. So a 50% hit rate's not really saying anything about the draft itself. It's just telling you how math works. So it's not really a good thing to go off of. Like, what the hell is hit rate, right? It's not a real stat. So when you throw that one out there as like your justification for throwing out everything else that goes into drafting a player and just going off vibes, it just feels like a bad idea. Now, here's why what Nathan's saying really doesn't make sense. It makes it seem like everybody across the board has a 50-50 hit rate, regardless of what they've done before in college. So you might as well take whatever position you want, right? That is the justification for just drafting a quarterback, despite none of these quarterbacks being good enough for Nathan to just argue on off the merit of those quarterbacks as players themselves, not necessarily using positional value and not using positional value as a crutch to prop up an argument for drafting a quarterback in general. It's asking me to pretend like Joe Burrow coming out in 2020 had the same probability for success as somebody like Caleb Von Chason, right? Like, it's acting like these players don't have history and tape that tells us what their skill set is and what their skill set projects to in the NFL. Now, is this a perfect science? No, there's been plenty of prospects that scouts have raved about that have not been able to make the transition for one reason or another. Nathan is right when he says there are no sure things in the NFL draft, but it's not all a flat hit rate. Like, some guys have skill sets that project better for the NFL. A good example of this is Derek Barnett and Myles Garrett. Some of you may not remember this, but people were arguing at the time that Derek Barnett was a better prospect than Myles Garrett because Derek Barnett was more productive in the SEC than Myles Garrett was in the SEC, and that Derek Barnett should be the first edge taken because of that body of work here. But what that argument ignored is that Myles Garrett had athletic gifts that uniquely translated his game much better to the NFL than Derek Barnett. So when they both got to the NFL, it wasn't a surprise that Myles went number one in that draft and that Myles was a much better player than Derek Barnett because his skill set showed us in college that he was going to project better to the pros than somebody like Derek Barnett. We're not randomly saying these prospects are good. We're saying these prospects are good because they have demonstrated skills that translate to the NFL, athletic ability that translates to the NFL. Abdul Carter is a much better prospect at his position than any of these two quarterbacks are. The same can be said with Mason Graham. The same can be said with Ashawn Jeanty. The same can be said with Travis Hunter. Like, Travis Hunter, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, Ashton Jeanty, all special prospects. Prospects, the quality of these guys aren't necessarily in every draft class. There is a prospect the caliber of Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders in almost every draft class at the quarterback position. Some years there's not, like 2022, because it's just a uniquely awful year for quarterbacks. But most years you have a prospect the quality of Shedeur Sanders. It is not rare what Shedeur Sanders offers as a projection to the NFL. It's why people are leaning towards taking one of these guys who feel like they have a better chance to be special in the NFL than Shedeur Sanders has, because what their body of work, their athletic ability projects them to be at the next level. It's not a flat hit rate. Scouting works, right? I think there is a tendency to act like scouting does not work, but scouting works. And we have gotten so comfortable with scouting working that the few times or the examples where scouting gets it wrong or the limitations of scouting are shown, we act like that means that scouting itself does not matter. But the fact is that you know what players to talk about in the first round on a pretty consistent and reliable basis every draft because of scouting. Without scouting, we would have done things like think that Derek Barnett's a better football player than Myles Garrett because he had more sacks. Scouting is what helps you avoid making that mistake. It's not a perfect science, and it's arguably not even a science, but scouting as a process, it works more often than it does not, and it has been an incredibly successful strategy for finding talent in the NFL for decades. Like, we tend to think of a situation like Brock Purdy performing like a first-round pick while being a seventh-round pick as an example of scouting does not work, right? Scouting gets it wrong all the time, right? It's an example to kind of say that scouting is bad. The fact at a situation like Brock Purdy or Tom Brady are super rare, these situations that happen like a decade between each other. It's not very common that franchise quarterbacks get discovered in the later rounds. Would actually point to scouting working. No, it's not 100%. Guys like Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins have slipped through the crack. Brock Purdy slipped through the cracks. Tom Brady slipped through the cracks. But for the most part, really good players are taken in the first and second round. We take it for granted how good scouting is in the NFL, especially. And that leads us to make overestimations of how many times the scouting gets it wrong. And look, it's important to maintain a balance. Like, you don't want to just say, hey, I'm going to do whatever scouting tells me to do. I'm not saying you should close your eyes and just blindly trust scouting because, again, it's not 100%. It's not a science. But any process that completely disregards scouting and acts like every player has the same hit rate of success is destined to fail. Scouting informs the process, and acting like that does not matter because it's not an exact science is ignorant. And that's what Nathan Zegura, whether he is aware of it or not, is arguing for. And that is why I don't love the arguments, the justifications I'm hearing for drafting a quarterback. If you were making the argument to me that you thought these players off the merit of their tape were good enough to get drafted at number 2 overall, I have no problem with that. I have no issue with the idea of taking a quarterback at number 2, obviously. But when all of your justification is, hey, let's throw out everything we know about scouting, everything we know about these players as prospects, and just take a dude at a position because he plays that position, well, that's when you run into making the giant mistakes that have unfortunately defined the Cleveland Browns for the last 25 years. A lot of what I feel like the energy is for right now when I listen to Cleveland sports talk radio or when I listen to people, some people in my comment section, there's a lot of people in the comment section that understand what I'm saying when I don't want to draft a quarterback or feel the exact same way I do. I'm not saying that those people don't exist, but there's a lot of people out here who are seeking that instant gratification. They want the Browns to make that move. Why? Because they want to feel better about quarterback. If you draft Shedeur Sanders at 2, people are going to feel better about quarterback for about the next 4 or 5 months. And this is where the instant gratification versus delayed gratification comes into the conversation with the Browns. Because, look, if the Browns draft a quarterback at 2, even though we all acknowledge, or at least most of us in this space acknowledge, that this is not a great quarterback draft and the 2 prospects at the top of this draft would not likely be the top 2 prospects in a better quarterback class, despite all of that, you would feel that instant gratification. Because even if you did not want to draft Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward or whatever quarterback the Browns hypothetically take in the first round of this conversation, you're going to eventually talk yourself into it because you're a Browns fan, right? Like, most people care less about being right and care more about the team being successful. So even if you aren't somebody who wanted to draft a quarterback at 2, if the Browns do it, you'll feel better about the position because at least you'll know who's going to be the starter for the bulk of the year. It's going to be the dude that you drafted at number 2. You're going to know that you have some hope at the position because you just drafted somebody at number 2, right? Like, you can say it in your head. We drafted the quarterback number 2 overall. And it sounds like a fix here, right? Because that's usually where quarterbacks get drafted. And that's where you get hope for a quarterback if they're drafted in the top 3. Now, I think it does matter a great deal whether that player is worthy of the number 3 overall pick to get excited about it at a number 2 overall pick level. But nonetheless, people are going to get excited, right? People are going to have hope for the position. And that'll give us a lot of instant gratification, right? A lot of people will act like the Browns quarterback problem is solved for the next 3-4 months. And it'll feel good. And people talk about how we're going to get out this whole Watson thing and how people will have their instant gratification. Now, what happens if the guy you draft hits the field in September and he sucks? Or maybe you wait until October and he sucks. Or maybe you wait till November and he sucks. Or maybe you wait till December. You get the point here, right? And basically, whenever you put this guy out here, what if it becomes obvious upon watching him that your hopes were a little bit high for this level of player that you drafted? And then you start to realize, damn, I could have had that guy. I could have had this guy. I could have had that guy. I could have had, this edge. And then you start to look at the rest of the rookie class and you start to think to yourself, damn, I had the number 2 overall pick. I could have had that guy. I could have had that guy or this guy or the rookie of the year or the offensive rookie of the year or the defensive rookie of the year. And you start to regret your pick. Let's say after the season, you're not feeling great about the quarterback that you took in the first round of 2025. But you took him 2 overall, so you're not going to go into 2026 thinking that you're going to draft a quarterback. But you look at that 2026 class and you're like, damn, I like that guy. Oh, that guy's really good. I would have preferred to draft that guy. And you don't draft that guy. And you stick it out with the guy you drafted number 2 overall because that's what you do. And then year 2 comes around, not much promise. And then some of these other quarterbacks from the other class start to look good. So you got the instant gratification in the first 4 months after you drafted the quarterback number 2 overall. But there's a good chance that in 2 years, you're going to be furious that that's what you pursued. Now, I'm not saying this is how it's guaranteed to happen. I'm just laying out an example of how this instant gratification versus delayed gratification thing could work out, right? Like, if you want to know a real example of this working out for a team, look at the Houston Texans, ironically enough, right? They traded Deshaun Watson in 2022. Everybody was pushing them to draft the quarterback. They were in the top 3 of the 2022 draft. They decided to pass on the quarterback, took the best player available. That was Derek Stingley. And then the next year, they made a move to go get C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson to pair them together. And the next thing you know, the Houston Texans are back-to-back division champions. I'm pretty sure people were furious after the Houston Texans traded Deshaun Watson and did not have an answer at quarterback other than, hey, we're going to start Davis Mills. And then they, won 4 games the year after, 3 games the year after that, last place finish. People were mad. People were furious. I'm pretty sure a lot of people wanted Nick Caserio fired. But eventually the plan worked out. Now, I'm not saying the Browns need to go as drastic as the Houston Texans went. The Browns have significantly more on their roster in 2025 than what the Houston Texans had on their roster in 2021. There's not the same need to be as drastic or to take as much time or to lose as much as the Houston Texans did. But it is something to look at because the Texans could have easily fell for the hype, drafted Kenny Pickett number 3 overall, and then in the next class, they would have passed on C.J. Stroud because, oh, man, we got Kenny Pickett. And think about what kind of a mistake that would have been. A lot of people, because the Browns have these big questions to answer at quarterback, want to force an answer early, want the Browns to find an answer early. Or if there's not an answer that's available, right? Because this is what I've been met with sometimes, where I'll fully explain to somebody why this year's quarterback class might not be a class that you want to take a quarterback in the top 3, right? And somebody will hit me with, yeah, I get what you're saying. These prospects are way more flawed than what they would usually be. And drafting somebody, one of these prospects early, would be probably the worst prospect taken in the top 3 since Mitchell Trubisky. But the Browns need a quarterback. And they should be able to manufacture one, basically, right? They should be able to will one into existence. And it's just not how that works. Like, that urge for instant gratification, I think, has a lot of potential to stack mistake on top of mistake. If you're already dealing with the fallout of the failure of Deshaun Watson, right? You don't need to rush to compound that with potentially overdrafting a player at 2 and dealing with the consequences of overdrafting a player at 2, which is similar to the consequences of Deshaun Watson, trading for him and it not working out, right? Like, you can't rush quarterback. If you want to find an answer here, you got to be patient. You got to be willing to wait until you see the right quarterback to take a swing on, or the right crop of quarterbacks to take a swing on. You can't rush it. And I think there's a lot of energy here to throw caution to the wind and rush it, just so we can feel a little bit better for a couple of months about the quarterback position. The Browns this offseason are going to have to try to avoid the unmistakable and very alluring draw of instant gratification at the quarterback position. This can manifest itself in a giant trade for somebody else's starter, a giant contract for Sam Darnold, or overdrafting a quarterback at 2. All of these options are going to seem reasonable to anybody who wants that instant gratification at the quarterback position. It's an unmistakable and very hard to escape attraction lure that the Browns are going to have to avoid for the long-term benefit of this football team. Treating the number 2 overall pick, in my opinion, as a scratch-off lottery ticket to hope you get lucky and win you a quarterback, right? 1 out of 5,000, is a terrible strategy, in my opinion. It's the kind of strategy that I've been unfortunately familiar with the Cleveland Browns organization doing with other regimes, and the kind of strategy that I'm hoping that Andrew Berry will be better than. We don't know if that's the case. This is the first time he's been putting this amount of pressure in his entire run as Browns GM. We're going to find out who Andrew Berry is this offseason, because I think avoiding this lure is going to be something that's not made for the week. A lot of GMs would be in this situation and just cower down and take a quarterback and hope that scratch-off ticket works. But avoiding doing stuff specifically like this is the entire reason Andrew Berry is here. The reason the Browns went with somebody who was process-based. The reason the Browns went with somebody who was logic-based is specifically so they avoid doing stuff like using the number 2 overall pick as a quarterback scratch-off. That if Andrew Berry succumbs to that pressure and makes a decision that feels like he was just trying to scratch it off, then he has no purpose here anymore. So he has to be better than that this offseason. Not saying that's easy, but that's the option that he has. He has to be better than that. But if Andrew Berry is a man who trusts his process, if Andrew Berry is a man who trusts what his work says, then Andrew Berry should trust what the scouting tells him, what his process tells him. And if that process tells him to take quarterback, as long as he could justify it with football, it's a decision I'll have to be okay with. But if it's a decision that he's making because of positional value or any other reason other than your belief in these prospects individually, then, well, I have a huge issue with that. The Browns should select the player that they feel like gives them the best chance to have a successful all-pro level player for their football team at number 2. And as much as I would love to tell you that one of those guys is the quarterback that you could select at number 2, I don't believe that's the case. I believe that is going to be more likely for Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Travis Hunter, but not necessarily one of these quarterbacks. I don't know what the Browns process is telling them. All I can tell you is what my opinion is on the matter. This is my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.